I did not know until yesterday evening that I was going to be doing this. So you've got me. Is anybody here a first time dining for women? First time you're experiencing this? All of you are pretty veterans of all of this. Hey, Heather, you didn't know I was going to be here either. Okay. Okay. So all of you are pretty veterans at this. So welcome everybody. I think most of you know how to mute and unmute. If not, the rest of us will remind you. The chat is for asking questions. Sheila will be reading out the questions and Heather will answer them a little bit later. But before we get started, we need somebody to read the dinner affirmation for us. Does anybody want to do it? Or shall we just twist some arms here? Okay, Mary will do it. Sheila, you want to? Sheila, I'll bring it up on the screen.
Okay. Dining for Women affirmation. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. As we share food, we share something of ourselves and we honor each other. We recognize the powerful associations of women to food, life, and nurture in all cultures. We honor the importance of those. We also recognize the burdens they can bring. We remember the women about whom we've learned, the ones they strive to nurture, and the organizations that are trying to nurture them. By eating together, we remember and honor those women who also have favorite foods and family recipes. And we express the hope that through our efforts, they may find more sustenance for their lives. May we all be able to feast together someday.
Thank you, Mary. And Sue, you were supposed to read the dinner affirmation. So you want to say your Om now?
I'm sorry.
No, it is a joke.
I get call on you, Mary.
Yeah.
I was being quiet on purpose.
Yeah. She served on the Grand Selection Committee. I get to tease her all I want. So I was just pulling her leg. So before we get into our grantee presentation, have all of you seen our strategic plan video? We have a new video for okay. Is there anybody who would like us to show it and have a discussion? Please just put your thumbs up and we can bring it on. Otherwise, we're moving into the grantee presentation. Does everyone know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Okay, so all of you are familiar with it. Do you have any questions? If not, we will kind of move on into the grantee presentation. So, okay, yeah, okay, so let's moving on. So Sheila, we have more time to chat. So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Heather Ibrahim Leathers. She and I have had a long conversation and recorded a Zoom interview. Both of us were trying not to cry through that. But Heather, you want to wave so everybody gets to see you? Okay, there she is. So Miss Heather Ibrahim Leathers founded Global Fund for Widows following the passing of her grandmother in 2009. Since then, the Global Fund for Widows has raised empowerment programs in Egypt, India, Tanzania, Nigeria, Bolivia, and the Dominican Republic. In addition to technical and economic programming, Ms. Ibrahim Leathers is an active advocate for the rights of widows and child widows at the United Nations, presenting regularly, including at the Human Rights Council in Geneva, at the Commission on the Status of Women in 2018, 2017, 2016, and 2015 in New York. Ms. Ibrahim Leathers has also presented on widows at the United Kingdom's House of Lords. She recently received the Business Council for Peace Women Forward Award for their financial catalyst innovation, the Widow Savings and Loan Association, so WISLA's award, basically. So, Heather, do you want to go ahead and do the grantee presentation? You're muted.
So I, first of all, want to thank Dining for Women for this opportunity. I have to say that you are the first organization to fund the microbanks that I invented 2 years ago. And I commend you for being visionaries and for being intrepid and fearless women who are willing to see what others don't see and willing to take risks that others won't take. So I want to thank you for that. I am happy to go through a presentation, but I think most of you may have already seen sort of the slides that we work with. You know, with our presentation with Vina. So I'm happy to either give a presentation or just talk a little bit about my history, where we're coming from and what we've done in Kenya and how, and then perhaps open it up to questions. Vina, is that how you would prefer to do it, or?
Like I said, you're in the same living room with all of us. So just be laid back and go for it,
Okay.
whatever works.
All right, thank you. I started the Global Fund for Widows from my kitchen table about 12 years ago. I had originally thought that my grandmother had passed away. I was pregnant with my second. I was 35 years old. I was working on Wall Street, and quite honestly, all I wanted to do was work on Wall Street. I was a banker. I financed banks. I built banks. I invested in banks. I majored in banks. Everything in my life was banks, and so I'm one of those rare bank geeks that you find on Wall Street every once in a while. But when my grandmother passed away when I was pregnant with my second, I got very angry, and I didn't understand why. And I realized finally that it was really because she had lived such a miserable life as a widow in Egypt. And what happened when she was widowed at 35, is that she was disinherited. Her husband's brothers came in and basically took everything that she owned. She was forced to immediately remove all the children from school because she couldn't afford to educate them. And she had to make really hard decisions. So the one decision that she could make was to educate the oldest son. The two middle sons did not receive an education. And then my mother, who was the youngest and only daughter, had to leave school for a while, but then eventually my uncle was able to bring her back. The good news is that my uncle last week was named a Nobel laureate, the one that was educated. So there is definitely hope in long-term sacrifice. And then the bad news is that the two uncles who were in the middle never received an education and lived in complete and utter destitution, multi-generational destitution, for the balance of their lives. My uncle was able to eventually educate my mother, and she became a fashion designer and, you know, traveled to the United States and started a fashion empire for herself and lived a very good life. So that was the moment of widowhood, and that moment became my moment of obligation. And I started researching it and saying, God, you know, there must be other grandmas and, you know, in the developing world. And what I realized through my research was that this was actually not an issue about grandmas. Widows are young. Widows are responsible for children. And across the entire world, there is a minimum of 300 million widows. When you put it in context, if I say apartheid, all of you know what I'm talking about, right? Apartheid affected 33 million people, including men, women, children, blacks, and whites. If I say female genital mutilation, you know what I'm talking about. We didn't understand that maybe 10 years ago, and apartheid maybe 30 years ago, we didn't understand it. It existed, but we just didn't know about it. FGM affects 200 million women and girls. When I say widowhood, we have no idea what I'm talking about. And I get the deer in headlights, like, what are you talking about? 300 million women, and that's not including my whole global scope of the definition of widow. So getting to the definition of widow is actually really important, and it's technical, but I'm going to share it with you guys so that you guys understand the scope. You and I think of widow as a woman who's lost her husband, but how do you define husband? You and I will think of the husband as someone who I have a legal marriage and a certificate that commemorates and legally binds us together. But that's not how the rest of the developing world actually marries. The way the developing world marries, and you may have seen it on the video, is that it is some sort of customary marriage that doesn't have any legal binding. It only has a cultural binding. And so when most of the widows in the world, when most of the women in the world get married, they have no legal recourse to the husband's estate because there's no legally binding marriage. The second kind of widow is what we call the functional widow. This is the widow whose husband has disappeared. Was it a disappearance due to a state action like Sri Lanka? Or was it possibly due to a non-state action like Boko Haram or ISIS? In either case, is ISIS or Boko Haram or the country of Sri Lanka, the government, going to issue a death certificate to the widow and say, here, we hereby release you from the burden of being perpetually married into, infinity. Please, I allow you to go and inherit your husband's estate, and please, collect social protections. They don't have any of that. And so this functional widow lives in what I call the perpetual doom loop. And then the third type of widow, which no one is talking about, is the widow of forced marriages. So when we hear about the girls, these are mostly girls, actually. I have 10-year-old widows. I have 12-year-old widows. These are girls who go to school in the morning, are abducted in the afternoon, spend 3 years being forcibly married to terrorists or to child soldiers or other soldiers, and then they return, whether they escape or are released or somehow they return. We celebrate the return and we're happy that they return. But the truth of the matter is that these girls return to us as widows. Now, you and I would never recognize that marriage. In fact, it doesn't even dawn on us that these girls had a marriage. But the truth of the fact is that when they return to their families or they return to that internally displaced camp, oh, you have Boko Haram blood. Oh, no, you're a Boko Haram widow. You don't drink from our well. You have to go find your own water. Oh, no, you can't use these bathrooms. You have to go find it your own situation. And so their plight, especially as young girls, is even more tragic. And we have to address those. So the definition of widow is itself messy and is itself tragic. And so being able to address that becomes very complicated. For us, what we've done at Global Fund for Widows, and because I'm a banker at heart, and because I see everything under an economic lens, an economic empowerment lens, I really view the world under one main tenet, and I call it the golden rule. She who has the gold makes the rules. And so what I have done is I have invented a bank. This bank came along, and I'll tell you why. I was hosting a very fancy cocktail party in my house in New York, and it happened to be that somebody from HSBC, one of the head of Latin America, showed up at my apartment for this party. And he's like, oh, Heather, how are your widow projects going? Da, da, da. And I said, it's great, but I'm really focused on financial inclusion. These women need capital to start these amazing businesses. They need capital, and so we need to work with banks to financially include them. And he laughed and he said something horrifying that I will never forget. He said, ha, ha, ha. Every year the government comes to us and they offer us millions and millions of dollars, and they tell us, please include, don't forget the poor. You have to have a plan for financial inclusion. Here's tens of millions of dollars. Don't forget to do that. And we laugh and we take their tens of millions of dollars, and we have absolutely no intention of doing anything about it. And he said this to me in full honesty over a cocktail. And I got so mad. And I thought to myself, do you have any idea what I could do with even $1 million, much less, $10 million? Do you have any idea what I can do? And so that was my moment of obligation, my second moment of obligation, where I said, you know what, I'm just going to create my own bank. There's literally no one else in the world that can do this. And so I will. And so what I did is I took the village savings and loan model. This model is very common in the developing world. Almost every country, almost every culture knows how to save in this way. It's sort of banking for the unbanked. Women and even men will get together in groups, and they will agree that every month they will bring a small amount of savings to the pot, to the table, to whatever. And then when they all pool their funds, one person will collect that. So it's almost like a lottery. Over the course of the 12 months, somebody will collect that lottery. That's how my mom bought her first sewing machine. That's in Alexandria, Egypt. That's how my dad purchased the first stove that his mom ever had, is through this saving model. So I said, you know what? The widows already know how to save this way. What if I took this saving model and put it on steroids? So what if I took this model and then I brought my own capital and boosted it? And so that's what we ended up doing. We decided, all right, we're going to create this model where we're going to ask the widows, how much will it cost to start that vegetable stand? How much will it cost to start that mill? How much will it cost to start that fish drying business? You name it. On average, it's about $100. Capital they will never, ever be able to collect. And so I said, okay, you guys come to the bank with about $33. In the case of Dining for Women, it was $49.50. It takes them about 3 months to save that amount of money on their current businesses. So we said, you guys come to the bank with this amount of money, and for every dollar that you invest, I'm going to give you 2. And so Dining for Women, your grant is going to be that $2 that boosts the widow and gets her to $100, $150 right now. She does not have to wait 5, 10, 12 months. She now has $150 that she can go out and start her own business or grow her own business or do whatever it is that she needs in order to create this economic or income generating opportunity for herself. And it has been wildly successful. So we started, hi Freddie, how are you? We ended up starting with a group in Korogocho in the slum of Kenya, an urban slum in Kenya. And this widow came to us and said, you know, I think that I would like to be part of this brook bank. In Kenya, we call them brook bank. I would like to be part of it. And I have a group of 25 widows who are ready to start. And so we said, that's great. And Freddie trained them. And we entered into an agreement where we trained them. They knew what they needed to do. They saved their money. And then when they came to the box with their investment, we gave them $2 for every dollar they invested. They immediately went out and started the most amazing businesses. And those are some of the businesses that you saw on the video. Soap making. We have one woman who's growing her grocery, vegetable markets, mills. All of these widows have done incredible jobs. And the first thing that they do with the profits of their businesses, they send their children back to school. Now, why is that important? Why do I care if the children are in school? There's 2 really big reasons why we think that half of our success is defined by what happens to the widow's children. Number 1, the widows, the first thing that happens when they're disinherited and they have these harmful traditional practices that happen to them, the first thing that happens is they don't have enough money to send their children to school. The girls fall out of school. They turn and look to marry their daughters off as children. That is, in their minds, a form of protection. The second thing that happens is that their sons become recruited into military and extremist groups. And that is because it's the only hope they have, and it's the only hope of a job that they could potentially have. And so there's no coincidence, in my opinion, why the greatest amount of military recruitment in places like Iraq and Afghanistan are all recruits from widowed households, because they've all lost their parents ages ago in the wars, and this is the only opportunity that they have. So I will tell you quickly the results of preliminary results of our findings after the first year of Brookbank. I expected, as a finance geek, I modeled out, and we have all these models I can share with you if anyone wants to geek out with me. My expectation was that these widows would earn 220% return on their annual on their initial investment after 1 year. And Vina, I wanted to share this with you, and so I'm happy that you're here with us now. But in fact, the widow that you saw on the video, Faustine, who was the head of the first Brookbank, informed us a few days ago that in fact the return on her investment and the return on the entire group's investment for the first Brookbank was actually $5,000, and that equates to a 550% return. So more than double what our expected return was. So instead of having a bank worth $2,500, these women now have access to $5,000. And that is the benefit and the possibility that Brookbank offers and this model offers. And so I cannot begin to express my gratitude for Dining for Women, for all of you for taking the chance on us and for giving us this opportunity to be able to economically empower widows. And I'll close by just saying that our partners in Kenya are phenomenal. Our partners in Kenya have received the blessings and the endorsement of their government, and the government is working at lightning pace to secure the rights of widows in Kenya first, but I know that they won't stop there. And I am hosting our own virtual fundraising gala in 2 weeks. And I had the crazy momentary lapse of judgment by dreaming the dream of asking the Minister of Kenya's gender ministry to potentially be a guest of honor for us. And I found out just a few days ago that she needed special permission from the president, but that again, our partner, and because of the work of the widows and because of the wild success of Brookbank, the president granted her the permission, and she will be our surprise guest of honor at our event in 2 weeks. And so that just is another further endorsement that this is a human rights movement. It is going to be mainstreamed. I'm hearing the drumbeat, and it couldn't have been done without you. And so I'm eternally grateful to you, to the entire Dining for Women membership, to the grant committee, to Vina for holding our hands through this whole process. I'm eternally grateful. So thank you so much, and I'm happy to receive your questions.
Thank you so much, Heather. What a wonderful presentation, and yay for your gala. You will do really, really well. So Sheila, I'm happy to go with whatever you want us to do. Do you want us to watch the video, or should we go into questions? What would you like to do, Sheila?
We have quite a few questions already.
Okay, then go
yes,
ahead and shoot it to Heather.
A few of them are in the chat, a few of them were private message.
Okay.
Some of them you answered, Heather. What types of other micro enterprises do you anticipate the women might be inclined to set up or expand?
They have so many great ideas that it's really kind of hard to imagine. In Kenya specifically, and maybe Freddie can answer that even better than I can. What I try to do as an economist is try to take the widows into the direction of inelastic. So there's elastic markets and there's inelastic markets. Inelastic markets don't fluctuate with the economy. So they're not relying on tourism. They're not relying on anything that goes up and down. So I try to focus their attention and their skills and their investment into inelastic that go like this, no matter what the economy is doing, which means they're always going to have a meal on their table. They might not be making the most money, but they're also not busting when the economy is going south. And that tends to be food businesses, agribusinesses, anything related to consumption, sanitary pads. Those are things that we need them every day, whether the economy is up or down. That's where we want to live. We want to live in that zone. So again, we have widows who are doing sanitary pads and packaging them beautifully and trying to sell them, and actually now succeeding into selling them into larger markets. We have widows that are producing who have purchased mills and are grinding different types of grains into flours, etc., which are used to make breads and other product. We have widows who are doing duck raising and poultry raising, which is great because then they can actually take it up the value chain. So they can actually take it from just selling eggs to raising and selling chickens to actually slaughtering and selling slaughtered animals, and then potentially selling cooked as well. And so there's a whole range of that, and we really focused on the value chain, which we think is really a lot of money is embedded there. So there's really a ton of businesses, things that we didn't even think of, like the soap business that you saw, the green liquid that she was pouring into those bottles. She's making a ton of money during COVID. It's amazing. Like COVID was actually really great for her. So these are all businesses that these widows, they get it. They know how to find their marketplace. They know how to create businesses. And when they don't, they have our team on the field that's guiding and advising them.
Great, thank you. Someone wrote they're trying to wrap their head around the fact that widows are thrown out with the grandparents' grandchildren. So don't children figure in the equation? Since in our society, we foster the belief that the children carry on the deceased husband's posterity. So how do the children factor into those relationships?
It's really a great question. And it boils down to two things. It boils down to economics, and it boils down to patriarchy. From a patriarchal perspective, there are inheritance lines that prevail. So if there is a patrilineage inheritance line, the boy is worth more in the inheritance than the widow. And he is definitely worth more than his sister. And so in order to preserve the estate, in order to preserve the wealth of the patriarchal family, it's better for them to get rid of the mother and the daughter, but hold on to the son. At the end of the day, if there are no real assets, there's no real wealth to distribute, there's no land, there's no cattle, there's no whatever it is, then they might actually just get rid of the son as well. And the reason for that is because it's just another mouth to feed, and that mouth is going to want more later. And that's really what it boils down to. So it's patriarchy and economics at the end of the day. And you would think that you would want, and our Western minds agreed with you, you want to create a legacy, but we don't have the type of challenges that they do in the developing world. And so we need to sort of take off that lens and put on a totally different lens. How are we feeding ourselves today? And who's going to take this piece of land tomorrow? And that's how it's a self-preservation issue.
Thank you. In the video, you mentioned that Kenya has followed your lead on feeding the victims of COVID. Can you further expound on that?
Sure. So I was very blessed. Last year, we presented at the United Nations with a Michelin-rated, the only Indian Michelin star-rated chef, Vikas Khanna, who happened to have, at that time, produced a movie that went all the way to the Oscars on a widow in India who had changed his life. And we decided to invite him to our gala last year and be our guest of honor. And we crowned him as the Global Goodwill Ambassador for widows because he truly had the belief and the love for widows in his heart. Fast forward to COVID, and Vikas from his little apartment in New York started feeding the people that were starving in India. He started seeing these poor migrant workers being shut out of trains and planes and automobiles and walking back from their places of work to their villages thousands of miles away. And he couldn't sit still. And so he started calling all of the producers, manufacturers of food, you name it. He called everyone and started creating what was now known as Feed India. And if you look up Feed India on CNN, you'll see him. He just had an interview with Anderson Cooper 2 days ago. He just started feeding India. So at one point, he texts me with some of the results that he's secured. And I said, please don't forget the widow. And at that point, it was his like awakening, his own moment of obligation. He was like, of course I can't forget the widow. And so he and I developed a plan where we've now fed 3.5 million widows in India. And when we started doing it, we started posting online the way that we were doing it. And all of a sudden, the Kenyan government, who has been paying attention to what we're doing, decided, you know what, that's a really good idea. And our partner in Kenya took the model that we were doing in India and started implementing it with tremendous challenge because of the very strict lockdowns that they had. Our partner in India come together. They really defied all challenges, and I'll tell you what they did in a moment. And Freddie, you can attest to all of this. But they basically moved this into a paradigm. And so then the Kenyan government saw what we had done, what now Come Together Widows and Orphans were doing, and they said, this is a good idea. I think we'll do it too. And that's how they did it. Now, in terms of the video that you watched this evening, it was a challenge. And I have to give total credit to my partners in Kenya, because it was during the midst of COVID lockdown, which meant our partners had to go to the Ministry of Gender to receive permission to film this video. When they received the permission to film this video, they ended up having to also go to the police, right, Freddie? They ended up having to go to the police in order to achieve the approvals to travel across lockdown lines. And then because of the elevated crime rate, they actually had police escort with them the entire time. And so when you see those widows celebrating, what you don't see off camera is that they are encircled by police security the entire time. It was a colossal challenge. Oh, and they had to get COVID tests before they went as well. So they all had to get tested for COVID to make sure they weren't bringing anything to our widows as well. So it was a colossal challenge, but I commend them entirely for the work that they did and the commitment that they have. They are among the top rated teams in the world, and it's a privilege for me to work with them.
Sheila, just before that, I just want our Dining for Women members to know that I had convinced Heather that they don't have to kill themselves to get that Grantee video to us. That they don't have to risk life and limb. And I said, Heather, you can make a perfectly good video with just PowerPoint slides.
But you know what?
Then she came back with this.
Our team is that dedicated. They are so good. And when I saw the video, I was crying because I'm like, wait a minute, I created this on my kitchen table and this is what you guys have done with it? Like, really? I'm so blessed. So
Thank you, Freddie.
So yeah, Freddie, I should introduce Freddie. Can you wave?
Thank you, Madam Heather, for giving me this opportunity. Hope you can hear me well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Freddie Konyambu. I'm the program officer. Come Together Widows and Orphans Organization. We are the local implementing partner for Global Fund for Widows in all what we've been doing. I thank you for giving us this opportunity to serve the widows in Kenya. Widows in Kenya are facing a lot of challenges, and it's a high time now the widows of Kenya, their views can be able to be heard worldwide. Thank you for giving this a milestone. We are so much grateful for the work you are doing.
And Freddie is very humble because Freddie is the man who created all of the documentation. He's the man that's training the widows. You see him in the video. And it's also, is it 4 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning for you right now?
Sorry?
What time is it in Kenya now?
It's 2:37 a.m.
7 a.m.?
7 a.m.
2:37. It's 2:37 a.m.
2:37.
Yes.
Thank you for your dedication. This is what I mean. They're just great. You can't help but love them. You just can't. You just love them.
I'm humbled working with women.
How long has Freddie been with the Widows and Orphans organization?
Freddie, you joined like 1.5 years ago now, yeah?
Yeah, 1 year and a half. By April next year, I'll be finishing 2 years working with women.
How did you get involved with it?
For me, it's just a passion working with women because my mom is a widow. Yeah, true that. I just find attached working with widows, bearing in mind what some of the challenges these widows have been passing in relation to my mom, the problem she has been facing, all disinheritance, discrimination, all those things and being looked down upon. So it's a nice chance for me to work with widows and ensuring that indeed we give them a milestone and their voice should be able to be heard worldwide. And we are really grateful for you giving us this opportunity to present our views.
Freddie,
Where
what do you
are
think? Oh, sorry.
Yes.
What do you think it would take for your government to change their attitude towards widows?
The attitude for our government have been a good partner of us in relation to the widows' rights, because in Kenya we have laws which the government has imposed which protect widows. We have laws like domestic violence against domestic act, which protect widows against and form of the domestic and public service and gender affairs has been able to ensure that indeed if there is a widow who is facing a certain challenge, they can be able to come in and help the widows now. And even if when the widows have any challenge, they can be able to help. Yeah, in terms of reasoning to them and even the widows. And what I can be able to talk in relation to our government, the widows have been able to be sitting there in the decision making table. For instance, our founder, she's a widow and she's working with anti-FGM board. She's in the anti-FGM board, a board which protects widows and women from engaging in harmful traditional practices. Yeah.
I think, thank you, Freddie. Let me just not clarify, but add that our job in convincing the government has passed. The government is fully on board. The government is fully supportive. The government has changed 8 laws thus far, and now we're working on implementation. So we are not working to, and a large part is that due to the work that we're doing and that our partner is doing. And Kenya has extremely progressive government. So they get it and they want to make that change. The government's not the problem. The problem is that there are tiers of governments. And so when you have tiers of governments, the rule of the land is ruled by cultural or customary government. That's the law that is set by the chief. That's the law that's set by the priest or the imam. And then ultimately, when all of those two fails, maybe we'll consider what statutory law says. So if there's a chief that says this widow needs to be raped in order to be cleansed for the sin of her husband's death, that's what's going to happen. And it doesn't matter what national law says. That's what's going to rule, because there's not a single person that's going to go against their chief, because there are repercussions. And so what we've been trying to do is come straight to the chiefs and say, dear chief, we have to work with you and with our government. Dear imam and dear priest, we need to work with you and our government. And that's part of what we've been also doing with the Legal Empowerment Project, because what we're doing is teaching the widows, what the priest said was wrong. What the imam said was wrong. The chief did not tell you the truth. We need to let you understand that FGM is wrong and you cannot be the cutter, because they're lying to you. They didn't tell you the full truth. So for us, the onus is on us to bring that awareness to the widows themselves so that they can speak. They have the knowledge themselves in order to be able to advocate for themselves. And it has been hugely beneficial. The legal empowerment program, the widows knowing, we certify them as paralegals when they're done with their training program. But the fact that they have this knowledge and this understanding catapults them into a position of power that they've never had, where they can access justice, where they can talk about accessing justice, and suddenly people are like, oh, she's powerful, we're not going to talk. I will tell you, I'll give you an example of how this was manifest. in Tanzania, we piloted the bank first in Tanzania with a partner in Tanzania. And that was 2 years ago. And we now have 11 banks in Tanzania. Freddie, I think we have almost 30 banks in Kenya now, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And what we did in Tanzania is we started with these groups, and they went from being completely ostracized, not having a penny to rub together, unable to send their kids to school, to within a year and a half, 3 ran for local government. 3 widows ran for local council, and 1 of them succeeded. So it gives you a sense of just how much that economic empowerment allows them to access their voice and be fearless in accessing their rights. And it's just another one of the great benefits of this bank model. And so we're very proud of that.
And Heather, just to touch upon, you were speaking about the cleansing. Somebody had asked, after the cleansing is done, how are the women viewed after that? Are they now accepted or?
No. So they remain ostracized, and there's no statute of limitation on cleansing. So it might be once, it might be twice, it might be for her lifetime, it might be one individual, it might be multiple individuals, it might be gang related. There's no rule. It just depends on what the feeling is at the moment. There's no rule to it. Every village differs, every country differs, every situation differs. So no.
Some people wanted a little bit more clarification on how the widows are able to save that much, like for example, the $49.50 and the exchange between the $2 for $1, how that all works.
So in terms of the amount of money that they save, it takes approximately 3 months to save that kind of money. They're all doing work. They're all working somehow, whether they're washing dishes, they're washing clothes, they're have a small vegetable stand, a small business. They're all somehow surviving. And so what we end up doing is saying, okay, start saving a little bit more. Employ slightly more of an austerity plan. Don't buy that Christmas dress. Maybe, don't buy that backpack, the new backpack for your child this month. Let's save it for another month. Whatever it is that they need to do, they've been doing it. In Egypt, for example, I have some widows who will borrow from a sister or a cousin. So they do find a way to save that $49.50. The reason why we ask them to save that $49.50, there are 2 main reasons. 1, easy come, easy go. If they're not putting in sweat equity and money into that bank as a co-investment, then they don't feel the obligation to respect it as theirs. And then the second is that it truly is their purchase of their share in their own bank. And so it has to be meaningful enough for them to feel that they are truly invested. And we find that the widows, they look at that and they understand it, that $49.50 is their investment. So when they receive that capital, that almost $90, almost $100, they really truly appreciate it. They're never letting it go. And they work hard to make sure that their repayment rates are 100% on their loans, and that they're doing other really incredible things. So for example, and Kenny will attest to this, widows will say, okay, we're going to save a little bit of money in this bank, and we're not going to touch it. We're not going to lend it out, and it'll be just in case one of our widows has any problem, we'll be able to help her. If she has a problem repaying her loan, we'll be able to help her. They've created an insurance fund for themselves. It's brilliant, and they didn't even realize it. Then they're also doing something, they're saving a little bit of money on the side. We're just going to put a little bit of money aside, and especially in Tanzania, we've seen this a lot. And we're going to send one of our children to school, college. They created a scholarship fund. And these are widows who barely have literacy skills. So you can imagine what they're capable of if they are receiving a little bit of training, and what they're capable of doing with real resources. And part of why we created this product was because it really addresses the gaps in microfinance. I have a huge microfinance project in Egypt, but I was even frustrated with my own project because in order for my widows in Egypt to take a loan from me, they have to do one of two things. We have to either have collateral or we have to have a male signatory. Well, the widow has been disinherited. She doesn't have any collateral. She's on the street. And she doesn't have a male signatory because they've all either died or tried to inherit her or disinherited her. And so this model, the Brookbank model, allows her to address that issue without, or to gain access to capital without having those issues.
Wonderful. And are they given training and mentoring in the area that they're starting their business?
Absolutely. Freddie, you're the expert, you're the trainer. You want to address that issue?
Sorry, come up again.
The training and the mentorship as they start their own businesses.
Yeah, we do trainings for the widows and the mentorship programs, and inside the training we do paralegal trainings whereby we teach the widows about their rights, their basic rights, so that they can be able to have the paralegal knowledge, so that they can be able to know, yeah, this is what I'm supposed to do, this is what I'm not supposed to do, or I'm not being able to be intimidated because I don't know my rights. Yeah, we do trainings and we make sure they have at least a basic knowledge about bookkeeping, so that they can be able to know how to keep their records and in their lending, so that they can have that saving culture in them. Yeah, we do.
Thank you. Vina?
So I think for those of you who wanted to kind of hear about the sustained grantee, I thought I'd briefly tell you about the sustained grantee, but I did not want to stop this flow of conversation. And so after we get the sustained grantee out of the way, maybe you can keep asking questions and talk to Heather and explore some more. I think a lot of you will remember the Peter C. Alderman Foundation, whom we funded early in 2015, September of 2015. So Health Right International is the sustained grantee, and Peter C. Alderman Foundation has become a part of Health Right International. So Heather, actually, this is a story that also originated in New York City. Peter C. Alderman was a young man who happened to be invited to the Twin Towers on September 11th for a meeting. When he passed away, his parents, really wanted to give back to the world. And some of the questions that they asked themselves is, how does this hate kind of originate? And they honed in on conflict. You know, when there is conflict and there's a lack of hope, you and I have talked about this, when there's lack of hope, when things kind of close out, right? There is so much despair and there's so much anger, and maybe that manifests itself in this kind of disastrous ways. And so they decided to fund this project in Uganda among those women who were pregnant and who had experienced trauma, PTSD. And the intervention was a kind of a low-tech way of having the women deal with their PTSD, knowing that psychiatric care is difficult in some cultural situations, and also it's not affordable. So the low-tech ways were an intervention to kind of get at some way to get the family to kind of deal with their PTSD, talk about it. It was an immensely successful project, much loved grantee. Sue Malik, were you one of those who selected it? I mean, it broke our hearts when we picked that grantee. And so the sustained grant to Health Right International is $75,000 with an extension of that project. We figured that all of you could go to the website and watch the video, but you were having such a good time with Heather asking her questions that we kind of wanted to leave it open. But before I let Sheila ask a few more questions of Heather, I wanted to ask Heather one question, since you're the banker in the room here. So you have seen how successful microcredit enterprises have been, right? So we have funded a lot of microcredit enterprises where the women are smart, they are managing their banks. It's like we say, right? Talent is universal, opportunity is not. So when you give talented people opportunities, they work wonders. And so given the success of microcredit, the small loans given at certain times with absolute fabulous rates of return, right? You are now noticing the profit-hungry banks, like the one you mentioned, HSBC, trying to get into this market of microcredit and actually ruining the name of microcredit. Do you have any comments about that?
I think that they're going to be a ways off from trying to really truly come in. The big banks are too expensive to run. Even social impact funds are too expensive to run because the TPGs of the world and the HSBCs of the world, they want to fly in their business class flight. They want to stay at the Four Seasons. They want to do some research, and then they want to give a couple of loans but to have a branch in Korogochu or in Kibra doesn't make any economic sense for them. And to have their head of whatever fly in their business class flight just doesn't make sense. The numbers don't ever work. And so that's why the head of HSBC laughed at me when he said, oh yeah, financial inclusion. I get it. I'm a banker. I know it doesn't work. When I was a banker, I would tell you that it doesn't work. Why would I waste my time doing that? But that's why we needed to create our own model that eliminates all of that. For the record, I have been working for 12 years and I have refused to take $1. I haven't taken a red cent from Global Fund for Widows in the entire 12 years that I've been working 10-hour days for it, because I get it. I can't make the numbers work. I want the widows to get the money because I have a home and a roof under my head and they don't. It's that simple. So I don't think that that model will ever work for big banks and for social enterprise, all of that. It's just, they're going to talk about it and they're going to pretend because they get a lot of money from governments to do that, and they're never actually going to do anything about it. The people that we have to watch out for are what I consider the loan sharks, the microfinance sharks. These are the guys that come in and they say, oh, I'll give you a loan. It's a microfinance. It's not collateral. You don't need a signature. I'm going to give it to you for 5%. But what they don't know and the widows don't realize is that there's actually a 40% interest rate embedded into the second month or the third month. Those are the guys that are really gross. And those are the guys that we have to really watch out for. And those are the guys that are giving microfinance a bad name in a sense. We know how to deal with them too. But what's beautiful about the Brook Bank is that it's really not traditional microfinance. These widows own it themselves. They're not talking to anyone that they don't know. They're not taking money from anyone they don't know. They know me, they know Freddie, they know Diana, and that's all they need to know. And so when we give them that $2 for every dollar they invest, and you saw them celebrating around that box, that's it. They own it. It's theirs. They make their decisions on how much they're going to lend, when they're going to repay back, how they're going to use those funds. And then they're going to come back, and with their profits, they're going to add money to that bank and say, I need more shares. And then when they need that money, they're going to redeem their shares and say, give me that cash because I have a daughter to marry, or my daughter's going to college, or whatever else it is that they need. They own it. It's totally different. They're the boss, as opposed to microfinance organization who's going to say, you need to give me 12%, 40%, 30% interest rate. They're paying themselves. They're paying themselves their own interest rate, and they're cashing in on it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Heather, can you tell us how you met Diana and Freddie?
Yes. I get about 5 tragic emails a night from around the world. Each story is more horrifying than the next. And so for the most part, I don't respond. Because, I've had the wire $2,000 for me now to a guy that I thought was really, very responsible and very trustworthy. And those are not the partners that we look for. when I met Diana, she had come through not only directly to me, but through a partner in the United States as well. So it was a church-related, somebody who could vouch for her character, etc. And they said, she's real, she's not fake. And then she also had a huge following and a lot of video and media presence in Kenya. And so I started following her in that sense. And then I agreed to meet with her. And when I met with her, the one thing that she did not do is ask for money. She asked for advice. And she said, what do I need to do? I have this. And I said, the first thing you need to do is register your widows. I need you to go out and spend a year registering your widows all through Kenya. And she came back to me a year later and she said, I did what you asked me to do, and I think I have 4 million widows. And I said, well, that's crazy because the government says that they have 1.6 million widows. And she's like, no, I have 4 million widows. And I knew at that moment that she was the real deal. So we started working together and she started asking me for more advice. And then at that point, we were ready to launch this Brookbank idea. And first I invited her to come to the United Nations and present at Commission on the Status of Women, which she did with great grace. And then I had her come to my home and present to a group of my fancy New York friends. And I said, what do you guys think? And they said, we need to get her in front of the rest of the world. And so we did. And we brought her back to New York to present at my gala. And at that point, we knew that we needed to do a Brookbank, and we raised $25,000 to launch a bunch of Brookbanks in Kenya as a pilot. And Diana, for all of her multi-talents, she's not a banker and she doesn't understand the details of microfinance. She does now, but at that point, I was like, the most important thing a leader can do is know what they don't know. And we both know that you don't know finance. You know everything else, but you don't know finance. You know widowhood. We need a finance guy. And that's when we brought on Freddie. And Freddie knows finance. He was in microfinance for a long, illustrious career before he joined us, and he's been a blessing ever since.
Building off of that, Heather, can you share, after this question, if you want to unmute yourself and share, because I know there's several of you who asked questions in the chat and we're trying to get to them, but can you share a little bit more about your virtual fundraiser gala and how that will work?
Yes. It will be November 2nd. I can put it in the chat if you'd like to go to our website. If you, I'm going to put 2 things in the chat. globalfundforwidows.org, you'll find the invitation as well as the tickets, allows you to purchase tickets. Because all of you have supported us already, I would love for you I can issue you a guest pass, a guest ticket to our event because you have already made a donation. And if you want to do that, if you would like to attend, and I really encourage you to, because the stories that you'll hear Faustine, who was the widow who escaped because, in the video, who escaped because her husband's family was forcing her to have sex with her husband's corpse as part of the harmful traditional practice. And so she chose dignity over poverty. And she chose a life of impoverishment. And she was middle class at the time that this happened to her. So she was, this is not, what we're noticing is that widowhood and the reach of disinheritance and discrimination and harmful traditional practices does not respect age. It does not respect wealth. It doesn't respect socioeconomic status. It doesn't respect education. It will happen to anyone. And so what Faustine did is decided to leave and escape with her children. She will be presenting that evening, and she will be sharing her story, as well as we have the Minister of Gender of Kenya, which is due to the great relationship that our partners have in the field with the government. We also have the Ambassador of Sierra Leone to the United Nations presenting. We have the lead CNN producer, Africa Desk, at CNN presenting. And then we have the chef Vikas Khanna, who is the founder of this Feed India project, and he'll be sharing a little bit more about the projects that we've worked together on. And he is the Global Goodwill Ambassador for widows around the world. And so this is for him a very special project for him, and holds a very special place in his heart. But I'm leaving my email for you, because if you do wish to join our event and you do wish to have a complimentary ticket, I'm happy to issue one to you. It's just a link to our webinar. And please feel free to email me and just say you're a Dining for Women member. We're keeping a running list, and I'm happy to send you the link once it comes live a few days before the event.
Thank you so much for that kind offer, Veena.
So ladies, it is kind of time for us to wrap up. We try to keep this at 1 hour, but just like your chapter meetings, I know all of us love to kind of linger and hang around and chat. So I welcome all of you to unmute and offer Heather and Freddie a round of applause.
Yes. Yay!
Thank you so much for being here. And our chapter meeting is kind of over, but if you want to kind of just hang on and have a chat, you're absolutely welcome to. Thank you for being here. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for believing in us. And Freddie and I can hang out a little bit longer. Freddie, are you okay with staying a little bit longer in case you wish to ask any more questions? And actually, can I ask a question?
Okay.
Can I ask
Sure.
a question of the group?
Sure.
What do you think? What do you think about widows? And what are your impressions? What have you heard of this? What can we do? What can we do better? I would love to hear your thoughts.
I haven't heard of it before, but I think just that kind of at a drop of a hat, your husband dies and all of a sudden you're just left basically destitute. It's so sad. I mean, it's, we're so fortunate. We are. I've never heard of this before. I'm going to do some more research.